Welcome to Unknown Suspect, where every shadow hides a possibility and every glance may hold a clue. When Hercule Poirot arrives at the stately Greywick Hall, he expects a refined weekend among England's elite. Yet beneath the polished charm lies an unease no one dares voice. Small inconsistencies, strained smiles, and quiet whispers warn him that something is amiss. And when a shocking incident shatters the calm, Poirot must rely on his little grey cells to uncover the truth behind the elegant facade. Chapter 1. An Invitation to the Country. Hercule Poirot, world-renowned detective, guardian of order, and fastidious keeper of the most magnificent moustaches in Europe, sat in the corner of his London flat, sipping chocolate with great ceremony. He had spent the last week sorting out a regrettable matter involving a dishonest businessman, a misplaced ledger, and a secretary prone to dramatic swoons. When it finally closed, Poirot declared himself fatigued to the point of tragedy and announced that he would take une petite pause. It was at this perfectly chosen moment that the letter arrived. The envelope was of fine cream paper, sealed with a dark blue crest depicting a solitary windmill beneath a sweeping arch. Poirot turned it over with interest. "Windlebridge Hall," he murmured. "A place of the English countryside, no doubt, a place of peace, a place without excitement, unless, of course, they invite Hercule Poirot." He opened it carefully, avoiding even the smallest tear. Inside was a short, neatly written note from Sir Reginald Harwood, a gentleman Poirot had met briefly at a charity reception 2 years earlier. They had exchanged only a few words at the time, yet Sir Reginald had seemed the sort of man who valued courtesy almost as much as Poirot himself. The letter read, "My dear Monsieur Poirot, I apologize for intruding upon your well-earned rest, but I am in rather urgent need of discreet assistance. I fear that a situation of a delicate nature has arisen at Windlebridge Hall, one that requires the attention of a man of your exceptional abilities. If you could spare a weekend in the country, I should be profoundly grateful. Yours faithfully, Sir Reginald Harwood." Poirot considered the letter for a long moment. The wording was polite, yet vague. "A situation of a delicate nature," he repeated aloud, "which may mean anything from a quarrel among the servants to a scandal hidden behind the curtains. But Sir Reginald is not a man who dramatizes. No, the matter is real, and he is troubled." A quiet weekend suddenly seemed less restful, but infinitely more appealing. By the next morning, Poirot was seated on a southbound train, his suitcase precisely packed, and his moustaches lightly stiffened against the wind that so often sneaked through carriage windows. He watched London slip away, replaced by rolling fields and stone cottages that appeared and vanished like small, pleasant ghosts. Spring was beginning to show itself, daffodils shimmering in the fields, fresh leaves catching the morning sun, and the countryside breathing softly after the cold months. After a gentle journey, Poirot stepped onto the platform of a modest rural station, where a tall, rather severe-looking chauffeur awaited him beside a polished black motor car. "Monsieur Poirot?" he asked. "I am he," Poirot replied with a small bow. "And you, I presume, are sent by Sir Reginald?" "Yes, sir. I am Elwood." His tone was respectful, but without warmth. He lifted Poirot's suitcase, even though Poirot had already lifted it halfway, which the detective found mildly irritating, and placed it in the car with mechanical precision. As they drove, Poirot studied the countryside. Fields stretched in well-tended rows, sheep grazed lazily, and great handsome trees swayed with dignity in the cool breeze. Yet even from the car window he felt something unsettled, as though the beauty of the place was draped over a faint but perceptible tension. Then Windlebridge Hall came into view, It was a stately, centuries-old house of mellow brick and ivy-clad walls, surrounded by gardens that swept outward in immaculate terraces. The windows glittered like polished coins. A pair of stone lions guarded the entrance with appropriately majestic expressions. Poirot stepped out of the car, smoothing his coat and adjusting his hat. At once the front doors opened, and Sir Reginald Harwood descended the steps, hand outstretched in welcome. "Poirot, my dear fellow, you have no idea how glad I am to see you." Sir Reginald was a man of late middle age, impeccably dressed, charming by nature, but with a shadow of worry beneath his eyes. Poirot inclined his head. "You wrote that you required assistance, mon ami. When a gentleman such as yourself speaks of delicacy, I listen." Sir Reginald forced a grateful smile. "Yes, well, thank you. Truly. Come in, come in. The matter is awkward to explain." That remark, Poirot noted, was delivered with clear discomfort. Inside, the hall was grand, dark wood panelling, high ceilings, portraits of stern ancestors, and carpets so soft, Poirot felt himself sink an inch with each step. Yet grandeur alone never impressed Poirot. He was far more interested in the atmosphere that hung like invisible fog. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. Sir Reginald's wife, Clara Harwood, soon greeted him. She was young, much younger than her husband, and striking in a quiet, understated way. Yet her smile was brittle at the edges, and the way her hands twisted one another suggested nerves stretched thin. "How wonderful to have you here, Monsieur Poirot," she said, though her voice wavered. "We hope your journey was not too tiring." "You are kind, madam, but you, I think, are troubled." Her eyes widened, then she excused herself abruptly. Next came Sir Reginald's children from his first marriage, Thomas, a sharp-featured man with restless eyes, and Evelyn, tall, poised, and observing everything with cool precision. Their greetings were polite, but strained. Poirot felt instantly that neither Thomas nor Evelyn approved of Clara, though whether this was due to ordinary family tension or something deeper, he could not yet tell. When the introductions were complete, Sir Reginald finally led Poirot into a smaller study and shut the door behind them. "I shall be direct," he said. "Things are disappearing from the house. Small valuables at first, a watch, a silver cigarette case, a pair of antique cufflinks. I dismissed them as misplacements, but now it has happened too often." "And you suspect someone within the household?" Poirot asked gently. Sir Reginald hesitated. "I do not want to suspect anyone, but there is no sign of forced entry, and the family... Well, as you can see, we have been under strain." Poirot nodded. "Very well, Sir Reginald. Hercule Poirot will assist you, but I warn you, when one searches for the truth, one must be prepared to find it, even if it is not pleasant." Sir Reginald exhaled in relief. "Thank you, my friend. Truly." Poirot stepped back into the hallway, hands clasped behind him, eyes already sharp with purpose. The peace of the country weekend had vanished. The mystery of Windlebridge Hall had begun. Chapter 2. Whispered Worries. The next morning dawned cool and pale, the sky washed in the soft grey that often lingered over the English countryside before deciding what sort of weather it intended to bring. Hercule Poirot awoke early, not because he was accustomed to rising with the birds. He was not, but because the atmosphere of Windlebridge Hall had settled into his mind like a question waiting to be answered. Even in sleep his thoughts had circled the curious tension of the household. After precisely arranging his moustaches and straightening every fold of his perfectly pressed suit, Poirot descended to the breakfast room, where a long table was laid with admirable symmetry. The flowers in the centre matched the curtains, which pleased him. He liked a room that understood order. What pleased him far less was the expression of the people gathered around the table. Clara Harwood was already seated, stirring her tea far longer than necessary. Her pale blue blouse was elegant, but slightly rumpled at the cuffs, as if she had dressed in a hurry. Her eyes flickered nervously between the door and Sir Reginald, who sat beside her and tried to appear cheerful. Thomas Harwood lounged at the far end of the table, tapping a spoon against his plate in an irregular rhythm that irritated Poirot immensely. His gaze darted repeatedly toward the mantel clock, as though he were waiting for a moment to escape. Evelyn Harwood, seated opposite Clara, was the picture of restrained composure. Her posture was impeccable, her hair immaculate, and her expression unreadable, except for the faint tightening around her mouth whenever Clara looked her way. Elwood the butler moved silently between the sideboard and the table, refilling cups with faultless efficiency. Yet his eyes, sharp as pins, missed nothing. Poirot entered the room with a warm "good morning," but the atmosphere did not lighten. 4 voices responded politely, yet each carried a different undertone. Tension from Clara, impatience from Thomas, coolness from Evelyn, and dutiful neutrality from Elwood. Sir Reginald gestured for Poirot to take the seat beside him. "I trust you slept well?" "Like a cat before the fire, mon ami," Poirot replied pleasantly as he sat. "Except, perhaps, for a faint breeze of unease that wandered the corridors." Thomas gave a short laugh. "That's this house for you. Always some drama brewing." "Thomas," Evelyn said sharply. Poirot let the remark drift away. It was more useful unexamined for the moment. Clara attempted a smile. "I fear we have been rather on edge lately, Monsieur Poirot. It is not our usual state." "Of that I have no doubt, madame," Poirot said kindly. "A house does not gain so fine a reputation without peace at its heart." Her smile faltered, as though she did not quite believe him. After breakfast, Poirot suggested beginning his inquiries. Sir Reginald agreed and excused himself to attend to estate business, leaving Poirot free to wander. He started with Clara, whom he met in the conservatory, fussing with a group of potted lilies. The sunlight streaming through the glass roof framed her like a painting, but her hands trembled as she adjusted a leaf. "You are fond of flowers, madame?" Poirot asked. "Oh, yes. They calm me." She stepped back quickly, as if embarrassed to have been caught in a private moment. "I hope you don't think me silly." "Not at all, but I noticed that you seem troubled." She looked away. "This household has not been easy for me. I knew marrying a man with grown children would be delicate, but I had hoped time would bring understanding." "And instead someone steals," Poirot said gently. Clara's face tightened. "Yes, and I know the others think—" She stopped herself. "No, I will not say it. I will not accuse my family." Poirot bowed his head. "Very wise, madame. Accusations made in fear often prove false." But her reaction had told him enough. She believed suspicion lay close to her. Next, Poirot found Thomas in the small billiards room, practicing shots with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The man seemed relieved to have something physical to do. "You enjoy the sport?" Poirot asked. "Helps me think," Thomas said, though he missed the pocket entirely. He sighed and leaned on the cue. "Look, Monsieur Poirot, I'll tell you straight, this whole business started not long after Clara arrived." Poirot raised a brow. "You believe your stepmother to be responsible?" "I didn't say that." Thomas rubbed his forehead. "Only that things were normal before and now they aren't. Draw your own conclusions." "Les conclusions," Poirot murmured, "are best drawn when the picture is complete." Thomas clearly disliked this response, but Poirot moved on before he could protest. Evelyn was in the morning room reviewing letters with an air of practiced calm. She invited Poirot to sit. "I suppose you want my thoughts," she said, carefully folding a page. "Very well. Someone in this house is taking things, and it is either foolishness or malice. Neither is acceptable." "You suspect your brother?" "I suspect everyone equally," she said coolly. "Thomas is impulsive, yes, but Clara—" She paused. "Clara is overly nervous. People who are nervous often hide something." Poirot noted the remark carefully. Evelyn's tone was not cruel, but it held a quiet certainty that spoke of long-held doubts. The last conversation of the morning was with Elwood, who was polishing silver in the pantry. "Elwood," Poirot said quietly, "you have observed this family longer than I have. What do you think of these disappearances?" Elwood did not pause in his work. "I think, sir, that households under strain often create their own storms, but my position does not allow me to speculate beyond that." "A butler sees much," Poirot observed. "A butler," Elwood corrected gently, "keeps his counsel." Poirot left him to his polishing. Later that afternoon, while walking the grounds, Poirot paused near the library's French doors. The grass was soft beneath his shoes, but the soil by the doors bore faint impressions, light but repetitive, as though someone often lingered there, uncertain whether to enter. Someone watching the library, someone hesitant. Poirot bent to inspect the marks more closely. They varied slightly in spacing, as if made on different occasions, but one spot appeared fresher, the soil less settled. He straightened slowly. Inside Windlebridge Hall, worries whispered behind polite smiles. But outside, the earth itself had begun to speak, and Poirot always listened. Chapter 3. A New Disappearance. Poirot was halfway through a thoughtful inspection of the morning room fireplace, an ornate structure of carved oak depicting hunters on horseback, when a sharp cry split the quiet calm of Windlebridge Hall. It was a sound full of panic, the sort that jolts every listener into immediate motion. Poirot set down the small paperweight he had been examining and hurried into the corridor with surprising agility. The shout had come from upstairs, and by the time he reached the staircase, several family members were already leaning over the banister or rushing towards the source of the noise. Clara Harwood stood at the threshold of her bedroom, hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. "It's gone!" she cried as Poirot reached her. "My brooch! My diamond brooch! Sir Reginald's mother's brooch! It's gone!" Sir Reginald arrived breathlessly behind Poirot, colour draining from his face as he saw his wife's distress. "Clara, what's happened?" "My brooch," she repeated weakly. "The one you gave me on our wedding day. I left it here, right here, on the dressing table. And now—" Her voice wavered, and Poirot gently gestured her aside so he might examine the room. The dressing table was elegant, carved with floral motifs and polished to a soft gleam. On its surface sat a silver-backed brush, a music box, a glass tray containing a few hairpins, and a small empty dish where the brooch should have been. Poirot leaned closer, inspecting every detail. There were no scratches, no marks of struggle, no sign the dish had been moved. He touched the edge of the dish lightly, not a speck of dust. Someone with delicate hands had taken great care not to disturb anything but the brooch itself. Behind him, Thomas burst out, "Well, that proves it, doesn't it? Whoever's been stealing things has grown bold. This is no misplaced cufflink." Evelyn appeared moments later, her face pale but composed. She stood in the doorway, watching Poirot's movements with keen interest, but saying nothing. Poirot continued his examination. The window was half open, allowing a thin ribbon of cool air to flow into the room. A sheer curtain swayed softly. Poirot approached and studied the latch. It was old but sturdy. "Do you often leave your window open, madam?" he asked without turning. Clara nodded shakily. "Yes, I like the morning air. I opened it just before going downstairs." "Was it open when you left the room?" "Half open, just like this." Poirot murmured quietly to himself. A thief entering through a window in broad daylight was not impossible, but improbable. Yet improbable things had a habit of following him. He leaned slightly out of the window. The ledge below was narrow. The drop to the garden was not alarmingly high, but high enough to deter a casual intruder. The gravel path beneath showed no signs of disturbance. No, an external thief had not climbed through this window, not today. Poirot stepped back into the room and breathed in. Lavender, a strong scent, far stronger than the delicate fragrance Clara wore. He remembered it distinctly from the previous evening. Now the scent was almost overwhelming, as though someone had spilled perfume or sprayed too liberally. He approached the dressing table and inspected the glass bottles. One contained lavender water, nearly empty, though the stopper remained firmly in place. He asked Clara, "Have you used this recently?" "No," she said, surprised. "Not for days." "Curious," Poirot murmured. Behind him, Sir Reginald was attempting to comfort his wife, though his own distress was unmistakable. Thomas hovered at the edge of the room, arms folded tensely, while Evelyn watched like a cat, observing a room full of mice. Elwood the butler arrived at last, having heard the commotion. "Sir, madam, is everything, oh dear?" His eyes lingered on the empty dish. "Another loss?" "Another?" Thomas demanded. "This is far worse than another, Elwood. This is a deliberate theft." Poirot straightened and turned to face them all. "Messieurs, mesdames, if you please, may I ask that everyone step back into the corridor for a few moments? I wish to examine the room undisturbed." Though reluctant, they obeyed. Poirot closed the door gently and began again, this time with complete silence as his companion. He knelt by the window, inspecting the sill for faint fibres or impressions. Nothing. He checked the carpet for unusual marks. Only the usual tracks of footsteps and furniture. He inspected the bedspread for signs of disturbance. Smooth, untouched. He opened the wardrobe, not to search it, for he doubted the brooch was hidden there, but to observe. Occasionally, people betrayed their anxiety not through what they hid, but through what they arranged too carefully. He noticed something. 2 dresses hung slightly askew, their spacing uneven. One dress bore a faint brush of lavender scent. The other did not. Poirot touched the first dress. It was smooth and cool, recently handled. Someone had been in this wardrobe today. But that someone had not taken the brooch from inside, they had left traces of themselves instead. Poirot stepped back, thinking. After several minutes, he reopened the door. The family was waiting anxiously, scattered along the corridor like anxious theatre-goers, awaiting the next act of a play. Poirot spoke calmly. "The brooch has indeed been taken, but by whom and how, I cannot say at this moment." Thomas made a frustrated sound. Evelyn cleared her throat softly. Clara looked close to tears. Poirot raised a hand gently. "Rest assured, no item stolen with Hercule Poirot present remains lost for long." Clara calmed slightly, though worry lingered in her eyes. Sir Reginald sighed. "Poirot, this is turning into a nightmare. First small objects, now a family heirloom. What next?" Poirot's gaze moved from face to face, lingering on each expression, each twitch of unease. "There is more at play here than missing objects," he said quietly. "There is fear and secrets, and these weigh more heavily than diamonds. His eyes drifted towards the staircase, where the faint scent of lavender seemed to trail downward like a thread. It was a clue, yes, but to which truth he had not yet determined. What he did know was this: the house was closing around its secrets, and one of those secrets had a very heavy scent of lavender. Chapter 4. Red herrings and rumours. Windlebridge Hall had entered an uneasy hush. After the disappearance of Clara's brooch, conversation grew quieter, movements sharper, and suspicion spread through the household like a winter draught. Poirot noticed the tension during luncheon, where each member of the family sat stiffly and spoke only when necessary. Sir Reginald attempted light conversation, remarks about weather forecasts and spring pruning, but even he soon fell silent. Clara barely touched her food. Thomas kept glancing at the window as though expecting someone to approach. Evelyn methodically sliced her vegetables with the detached precision of a surgeon. Poirot, ever watchful, sat calmly and listened to everything said, and everything not said. When the meal concluded, he excused himself and strolled towards the servants' corridor. The household staff had maintained a polite distance from the morning's commotion, but Poirot never underestimated the eye of a maid or the ear of a footman. Servants often observed what their employers believed hidden. It was Alice, the younger of the two housemaids, whom he found dusting the lower shelves of the library. She straightened at once when she saw him, smoothing her apron nervously. "Begging your pardon, sir. I didn't expect anyone in here yet." Poirot smiled warmly. "Do not worry, mademoiselle. I come only to ask a few small questions. You were upstairs this morning, were you not?" Alice hesitated. "Yes, sir. I heard Mrs. Harwood cry out." "And you saw—" "What precisely?" The girl chewed her lip. Poirot waited patiently, giving her time. "Well, sir," she began at last, "I don't want to cause trouble. Truly I don't. But I did see Miss Evelyn earlier, before all the shouting. She came out of Mrs. Harwood's room. I thought it odd, that's all." "Ah?" Poirot lifted an eyebrow. "At what time?" "Just after 9, sir. Mrs. Harwood had already come down to breakfast by then, I'm sure." Poirot nodded slowly. "You are certain of what you saw?" Alice shifted uneasily. "I wouldn't say it unless I was. Miss Evelyn was fixing her sleeve when she stepped out like it had caught on something." She paused. "I didn't think much of it until later." "And you did not see anyone else enter the room before or after?" "No, sir." Poirot thanked her gently, promising nothing and judging nothing. Alice returned to her dusting, though her hands trembled. He strolled back through the library, reflecting on the information. Evelyn, slipping into Clara's room before the brooch was discovered missing. Poirot did not leap to conclusions, that was not his way, but the detail lodged itself neatly into the growing puzzle. He left the library and walked towards the stables, where he had earlier seen Thomas and Elwood exchanging quiet words. As he neared the building, he heard footsteps and the last faint echo of voices, quick, hushed, and abruptly silenced upon his approach. Thomas appeared first, emerging from behind the stable door. "Oh, it's you," he said, attempting to sound casual. "And a good afternoon to you also, Monsieur Thomas," Poirot replied pleasantly. "You seem startled." Thomas forced a laugh. "Just discussing the horses. The mayor's expecting a foal soon. Elwood was telling me they've been getting extra feed." Poirot raised a cool brow. "Elwood, the butler, is advising you on horse feed?" Thomas blinked. "Well, he knows more about the estate than father does. He grew up here, you know." Poirot stored that comment carefully. "I see. And this conversation required such secrecy?" "Secrecy." Thomas's face coloured. "We weren't being secret." Poirot did not challenge the claim. Instead, he stepped lightly into the stables, where Elwood was arranging a stack of crates. "Ah, Monsieur Elwood," Poirot said. "I hear you are knowledgeable about horses." Elwood's expression did not flicker. "I was speaking only in general terms, sir." "And your conversation with Monsieur Thomas, was it regarding horses?" A short pause. "Naturally, sir." Poirot noticed Thomas avoiding Elwood's gaze, a small but telling detail. "Very well," Poirot said evenly. "I disturb you no longer." He took his leave, satisfied he had pressed exactly the right amount. As afternoon sunlight slanted across the gardens, Poirot returned to the house. The hallway was quiet, though the atmosphere remained taut. In the drawing room he found Clara sitting rigidly, hands clasped around a handkerchief as though it anchored her. "You look troubled, madame," Poirot said softly. Clara startled. "I didn't hear you come in. I was only thinking." "Of the brooch?" "Of everything." She stood abruptly and moved to the fireplace, staring into its dark grate. "I know they think I'm fragile. Perhaps I am. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I never misplace things. I did not lose that brooch." "I do not believe you did," he said gently. She exhaled shakily. "Thank you." Poirot studied her carefully. Her eyes were rimmed with faint shadows, her shoulders were tense, and her gaze kept drifting to the mantel, as though something on or near it troubled her. "Madame," Poirot asked, "may I inquire what captures your attention there?" She blinked and looked away quickly. "Nothing. Truly nothing at all." Poirot did not press her, but the avoidance was unmistakable. Something about the fireplace unsettled her. Another note for the puzzle. After Clara left the room, Poirot performed a brief inspection of the mantel. A pair of silver candlesticks stood on either end. A small, framed photograph of Sir Reginald and Clara rested between them. A decorative box, empty, sat slightly off-centre. Everything was perfectly clean. Too clean? He lifted one candlestick. A faint ring of dust marked the spot beneath, yet the candlestick itself was spotless. Someone had moved it recently. Perhaps Clara. Perhaps someone else. Poirot returned the candlestick precisely to its dusty circle and stepped back, deep in thought. By early evening, Poirot felt the mystery tightening around him. Secrets whispered through corridors. Tensions flickered in glances and pauses, and the household seemed full of small contradictions, like tiny fractures in a flawless vase. Thomas made inconsistent remarks. Evelyn moved silently and watched everyone. Clara was afraid of something she would not name. And Elwood observed everything, without ever revealing a single thought. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "The red herrings," he murmured, "they begin to swim, but among them one true clue hides." He would find it, and when he did, the truth would unravel like a loose thread tugged free from a tapestry. Chapter 5. Conversations in Confidence. The following morning at Greywick Hall dawned with a crisp brightness, as though the estate wished to sweep away the tension that had settled over it the previous evening. Yet no clarity arrived with the sunlight. If anything, the brilliance of day only emphasized how many shadows remained unexamined. Poirot, already immaculately dressed, stood by the drawing-room window and regarded the grounds with quiet thoughtfulness. Miss Pembroke entered a few minutes later, her expression pinched and weary, as though she had slept poorly. Her usual brisk manner seemed softened, replaced by something close to vulnerability. "Monsieur Poirot," she said gently, "I wonder if I might speak with you privately." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course, mademoiselle. Please, sit. You have the look of one burdened." She perched on the edge of the sofa, twisting the chain of her watch between her fingers. "I fear I may have misjudged Miss Harrow last night. I do not approve of that girl's taste in acquaintances, but perhaps I was too quick to accuse her of, well, ill intent. Poirot's gaze followed the nervous movements of her hands. "You are troubled not only by your accusation, but by something else, I think." "You wish to tell me?" Miss Pembroke's throat bobbed. For a moment she said nothing, then she released a slow breath. "It is regarding my sister, Alice. I know Inspector Flint believes the matter connected to professional pressures or personal grievances, but I cannot let go of the feeling that something more sinister had entered her life. Something she kept from everyone." "Did she confide in you?" Poirot asked quietly. "In a way." Miss Pembroke hesitated. "She grew secretive, not dramatically so, but enough for me to notice. She would receive letters she refused to discuss, and once I overheard her speaking to someone on the telephone in stern tones. She denied anything was wrong, but she had never been a convincing liar." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "These letters? Do you know what became of them?" "No," she murmured. "I searched her room after she was found. I discovered nothing unusual, no letters, no envelopes, nothing hidden away." Poirot tapped a finger lightly against his knee. "And yet they existed." Miss Pembroke nodded. "I am certain of it." Poirot thanked her with sincere warmth. As she left, he allowed himself a moment of stillness. Letters vanished, a telephone call overheard in stern tones. It was not proof, but it was direction, something Poirot prized above all in an investigation. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Miss Harrow peered inside, tentative but composed. "May I come in?" "Enter, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "You seem calmer today." She offered a delicate smile. "A night's rest helps, though I admit I am still uneasy. I dislike the idea that anyone here suspects me of involvement in Miss Pembroke's death." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Mademoiselle, our task is to examine all possibilities, but you may relax for the moment. It is conversation we seek, not confession." She settled into a nearby armchair, folding her hands neatly. "I wanted to explain myself further, not only about the bangle, but about my work online. Some people think it frivolous, others believe it dangerous. I simply find it a way to tell stories." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Stories?" "Not lies, fiction. I enjoy creating short mysteries and posting them. Many of my followers send me puzzles or peculiar occurrences from their lives for inspiration. Most are nonsense, but some are rather inventive." Poirot's interest sharpened. "Mademoiselle, do you recall receiving anything recently unusual?" Miss Harrow's eyes flickered. "Actually, yes. Not long before Miss Pembroke died, someone anonymously sent me a message asking if I had ever considered writing a mystery about a secret feud within a household. It was an odd suggestion, phrased as though the sender knew a real example, but refused to name anyone." "A household?" Poirot repeated. "Did the message mention Greywick Hall?" "No," she answered. "Not explicitly. But now that I think about it, the timing unsettles me." Poirot considered her words carefully. He did not accuse her of holding something back, yet he felt a subtle tension. Something about the message clearly lingered in her mind. "Could you show me this message later?" he asked. "Certainly," she replied. "It is still on my phone." When Miss Harrow departed, Poirot moved to the breakfast room to find Dr. Halbert already seated at the long table, reading a newspaper with an air of exaggerated detachment. Poirot joined him. "Doctor," he began pleasantly, "you were acquainted with Miss Pembroke for several years, yes?" Halbert folded the paper. "Professionally, yes. Socially. Only insofar as one cannot avoid people in a small community. She was clever, principled, sometimes prickly, but fundamentally decent." "Yet you seemed unsettled last night when Miss Harrow mentioned a man following her at the inn." Halbert's jaw tightened. I reacted because it is nonsense. Irresponsible of Miss Harrow to fabricate dangers without basis. Poirot observed him keenly. Are you sure, Doctor, that your reaction was not prompted by recognition? A person familiar, perhaps? Halberd frowned. No, I neither recognize the description nor believe in phantom stalkers. The abrupt defensiveness drew Poirot's curiosity, but he let the matter rest. For now. When the doctor excused himself, Poirot remained in the quiet room, deep in contemplation. 3 conversations, and each offered a different thread. Miss Pembroke had hinted at secrecy and an unknown correspondent. Miss Harrow had received a strange, anonymous message. Dr. Halberd had overreacted to the idea of a man lurking at the inn. Individually, each detail was slight. Together, they formed the beginnings of a pattern, disparate pieces awaiting alignment. Before he could rise, footsteps approached. Gregory Ashcombe entered, looking pale and restless. Poirot, he said abruptly, may we speak outside? It concerns something I found. Poirot stood at once. Lead the way, monsieur. They stepped into the crisp morning air. Ashcombe withdrew a small paper scrap from his coat pocket. I found this in the waste bin of the old study, he said quietly. I wasn't searching for anything, I promise. It fell out when I moved the bin to fetch a dropped pencil. Poirot accepted the scrap. It bore a jagged portion of handwriting, sharp, deliberate, and unmistakably tense. 2 words remained. Not yet. Poirot felt a chill run up his spine, not of fear but of certainty. Someone in Greywick Hall had been communicating in secrecy. Someone who did not intend their message to be seen. He folded the scrap neatly and slipped it into his pocket. The game was advancing, and Hercule Poirot was ready. Chapter 6. Shadows along the corridor. Greywick Hall seemed curiously subdued that afternoon, as though the air itself carried the weight of withheld truths. Poirot sensed the shift instantly. The household, previously restless with speculation, now moved with a kind of furtive caution. Doors were opened quietly, footsteps softened, and conversations broke off the moment another person entered a room. Even Inspector Flint, usually firm and assertive, spoke with less impatience, as though he too felt the house tightening around them. Poirot took advantage of the uneasy calm to conduct a more deliberate exploration of the hall. He began in the east corridor, the oldest part of the building, where tall windows let in a faint, cold light. Portraits of Ashcombe ancestors lined the panelled walls, their faces frozen in expressions of vague disapproval. Poirot paused at each, not out of admiration, but because he never ignored the sensation of being watched, even by paint. At the end of the corridor stood the unused study, a room Flint had dismissed as irrelevant. Poirot, however, never dismissed a room simply because others considered it unimportant. He opened the door gently and stepped inside. Dust lay across the furniture, but not evenly. A subtle mark on the floor suggested recent movement. Someone had dragged a chair a few inches. The desk bore faint smudges on one side, and a thin film of disturbed dust formed a pattern inconsistent with years of disuse. Someone had been here not long ago, and not casually. He approached the desk. An ink blotter lay to one side, its pad stained by old marks. Poirot lifted it to the light. Most impressions overlapped in meaningless swirls, but one stood out, cleaner, sharper, as though made within the past few days. Not enough to discern complete words, yet the strokes suggested short, decisive writing. A note, perhaps, or an instruction. Before he could examine further, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Poirot returned the blotter precisely to its place. A moment later, Gregory Ashcombe appeared at the threshold, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. I didn't realize anyone used this room, Poirot said lightly. No one does, Ashcombe replied quickly. Too quickly. It's been closed off for years. My father intended to renovate it, but he never found the time. Poirot studied his face. Then you will forgive me if I ask why the dust suggests otherwise. Ashcombe stiffened. I have no idea. Perhaps the wind through the window gaps, these old rooms shift. Poirot said nothing. Ashcombe's explanation was weak, and even he appeared aware of it. The young man glanced towards the desk. Is something missing? Poirot followed his gaze. That was an interesting question for someone who supposedly believed the room untouched. I did not suggest that anything was missing, Poirot said gently. Ashcombe opened his mouth, closed it again, then gave a strained smile. Well, if you're quite done here, perhaps we should rejoin the others. Poirot inclined his head and left the room without revealing what he had noticed. He had found no clear evidence there, only a whisper of a possibility. But it was enough to confirm that someone had used the study recently, and that Ashcombe was uneasy about it. He resumed his walk, passing the parlour where Miss Harrow sat beside the window. She looked up from her phone. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, she said. I've been trying to locate that message I told you about. It's still there, but the sender's account has vanished, deleted. That happens sometimes, but not usually so soon. Poirot accepted the phone as she held it out. The message was brief, only a few lines long, but unsettlingly pointed. Some households hold more secrets than their walls can bear. You should write about one someday, a true one. No name, no profile image, and no further messages. You did not receive anything else? He asked. No, she replied. I assumed it was someone trying to get my attention. Now I'm not so sure. Poirot returned the phone thoughtfully. You did well to show this to me. She looked relieved. Does it mean something? Everything means something, mademoiselle, he replied, though the meaning may not yet be clear. Leaving her, he proceeded to the drawing room, where Dr. Halberd stood by the fireplace, polishing his spectacles with a handkerchief. He looked up sharply when Poirot entered. Doctor, Poirot began, a question, if you please. Did Miss Pembroke ever speak to you about receiving letters? Halberd hesitated. A fraction too long. Letters? No, certainly not. Poirot folded his arms. Mademoiselle Margaret believes her sister had become troubled by secret correspondence. Might she not have been mistaken? Halberd replied quickly. Grief can distort certainty. Margaret is under great strain. Poirot observed him quietly. You are very protective of her. A faint flush touched the doctor's cheeks. She is a friend, that's all. And yet, Poirot said softly, you seem almost offended by the idea that Miss Pembroke might have confided in someone. Halberd stiffened. People keep secrets, Poirot, even from those closest to them, especially from them. He left abruptly, leaving Poirot alone with the low crackle of the fire. Poirot paced slowly. The picture was far from clear, yet patterns were beginning to form. Someone in the house had exchanged hidden letters with Alice Pembroke. Someone had used the abandoned study. Someone had drawn Miss Harrow's attention with a message hinting at secrets. And all of these acts carried the same tone of secrecy, almost as if by design. As he stepped back into the corridor, Flint appeared from the staircase, looking harried. I've been searching for you, Flint said. Something's happened. Poirot lifted an eyebrow. Indeed. A discovery, Flint said grimly, out by the old gazebo. Poirot felt a quiet shift within himself, an instinct, a certainty that the case had just turned. Lead the way, Inspector, he said, and Flint did. The shadows in Greywick Hall were beginning to stir. Chapter 7. The Gazebo's Secret. A biting wind swept across the grounds as Poirot followed Inspector Flint towards the old gazebo. The structure stood near the western edge of the estate, surrounded by a ring of leafless trees that creaked softly in the chill breeze. Though once decorative, the gazebo now leaned slightly to one side, its paint peeling and its latticework warped by years of neglect. Greywick Hall loomed behind them, solemn and watchful. "We found it early this afternoon," Flint said as they approached. "Gardner spotted something unusual while clearing the fallen branches. Thought it best to notify me straight away." Poirot nodded, saying nothing. He wished to see before hearing explanations. Flint stepped aside once they reached the gazebo. Under the structure's slanted roof, lying half concealed by scattered leaves, was a small wrapped parcel. Poirot crouched and lifted it gently. The wrapping was simple, brown paper tied with twine, but the knot had been done neatly, almost professionally. "What is this?" Poirot asked softly. "Open it," Flint urged. Poirot untied the twine and unfolded the paper. Inside lay a silver chain with a pendant attached, a delicate teardrop shape made of smoky quartz. Poirot recognized it immediately. "This belonged to Miss Pembroke," he said. "I saw it in a portrait in her room." Flint nodded grimly. "Exactly, and there's more." He handed Poirot a folded scrap of paper found beneath the pendant. Poirot opened it carefully. The message was brief, written in rushed strokes. "I wanted to tell her, but it was too late." No signature, no clue to the writer's identity. Poirot felt a deliberate weight in the words. Someone had hidden this intentionally, not discarded, not carelessly dropped, but placed. And recently, judging by the unweathered state of the paper. "Who discovered it?" Poirot asked. "The gardener, Mr. Stanton," Flint replied. "He's certain it wasn't here the day before, says he would have noticed." Poirot doubted nothing. Stanton struck him as an observant man. If he said it was new, it was new. They stood in silence for a moment before Flint sighed. "It complicates things, doesn't it? Until now, we had only whispers. Now we have something concrete." Poirot held up the pendant. "It suggests someone wishes to be heard, but not directly. A confession half made." Flint frowned. "Or a misdirection. You're always talking about cleverness, Poirot. Could be trickery." "Everything could be trickery, Inspector," Poirot said gently, "but we must not leap to conclusions." They returned to the hall with the parcel, each deep in thought. Poirot asked to take it to his room for careful examination, and Flint agreed. Once alone, Poirot placed the pendant on the table and studied it from every angle, noting scratches near the clasp, new ones. It had been tugged or handled roughly. The chain smelled faintly of damp earth, confirming it had been outside recently. But the most telling detail was a thin fibre caught beneath the clasp, pale blue, almost translucent. Thread from clothing, a curtain, a scarf. Poirot stored it safely in an envelope. Nothing would be overlooked. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Miss Pembroke entered slowly, her expression tense but composed. "Inspector Flint told me something was found," she said, cautiously. "Is it true?" Poirot hesitated, then gestured for her to come forward. She approached the table, and upon seeing the pendant, her breath caught. "That was Alice's," she whispered, fingers trembling. "She wore it constantly. I thought it had been misplaced, or perhaps taken during everything that happened." Poirot watched her carefully. "Does it signify anything besides sentiment?" "Yes," she murmured. "It was a gift, from someone she never named. She said it reminded her of clarity after storms. A strange phrase, but I remember it distinctly. Do you know when she received it? Last spring, she replied, though she hid it for weeks before admitting it was hers. That was around the time she became secretive. Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. And you believe the giver was connected to the troubles troubling her? I don't know, she whispered, but I believe she cared about whoever it was, and that frightened her. Miss Pembroke left shortly after, shaken but grateful for the truth she had been shown. Poirot allowed her to go without further questioning. She had given him enough to consider. As evening drew in, Poirot sought out Ashcombe, finding him in the library. Ashcombe seemed startled to see him, and even more startled when Poirot placed the pendant on the table between them. You recognize it? Poirot asked. Ashcombe's eyes flickered, not with outright fear, but with something close to guilt. It belonged to Miss Pembroke, didn't it? Yes, Poirot replied, and it was hidden in the gazebo. Ashcombe swallowed. I don't know anything about that, truly. Poirot leaned forward slightly. You visited that gazebo last night. Ashcombe froze. How did you... A footprint, Poirot said, not easily visible unless one pays attention. You must understand, monsieur, that nothing escapes the eyes of Hercule Poirot. Ashcombe slumped slightly, running a hand through his hair. Fine, yes, I went there. I needed air. I needed space to think. But I didn't see anything, I swear. Why did you need to think? Poirot asked quietly. Ashcombe hesitated. Because things are not as simple as you believe. I overheard something days ago, something between Dr. Halberd and Alice. Poirot waited. I heard them arguing, Ashcombe said. Not loudly, but urgently. Alice said she couldn't keep covering for him. Halberd said something about one mistake ruining everything. I didn't understand it at the time. Poirot absorbed this without comment. Why didn't you tell us sooner? He asked. Because I wasn't sure what it meant, Ashcombe admitted. And I didn't want to accuse Halberd without cause. Poirot rose, his expression unreadable. Thank you, monsieur. You have helped more than you know. Ashcombe watched him leave with a haunted look. Night had settled by the time Poirot returned to his room. He stood by the window, gazing out at the darkened grounds and the faint outline of the gazebo. Secrets layered upon secrets. Someone hiding gifts. Someone writing messages. Someone arguing in the shadows. Someone slipping out at night. The truth hovered just beyond reach, but it was coming closer. And Poirot, ever patient, prepared himself for the final revelation, waiting in the depths of Greywick Hall. Chapter 8. Poirot unravels the truth. By the next morning, Greywick Hall felt taut as a drawn string. Every resident moved with a tense awareness that answers were near. Poirot sensed it, the quiet, the glances, the hushed movements, as though the house itself waited to exhale. He requested that everyone gather in the drawing room after breakfast. No one refused. When they assembled, Poirot stood before the fireplace with hands neatly clasped. Inspector Flint lingered by the doorway, notebook ready, though he looked as eager as the others. My friends, Poirot began, voice calm, we have walked through shadows and half-truths these past days, but now the mist is lifting. Allow Hercule Poirot to explain. Miss Pembroke sat stiffly, pale but composed. Miss Harrow clutched her notebook, fingers white at the knuckles. Ashcombe hovered near the window, anxious but curious. Dr. Halberd stood apart from the group, posture rigid, expression unreadable. Poirot surveyed them for a long moment. Let us start, he said, with the pendant found in the gazebo. A curious place to hide such an item, unless its owner feared it might connect them to the victim. Halberd gave a slight snort. Anyone could have put it there. Poirot smiled gently. Indeed, Doctor, but not everyone could have left behind a thread of pale blue fibre caught beneath the clasp. A fibre matching, I might add, the lining of your coat. Halberd stiffened. Coincidence? Poirot continued as though he hadn't spoken. And then there is the matter of the unused study, a room no one supposedly entered. Yet it bore the unmistakable signs of activity. Most notably, the impression on the ink blotter forming part of a written phrase. He pulled a small sheet of paper from his pocket. With a simple pencil rubbing, the phrase reveals itself. She must not speak. A menacing sentiment confined to the shadows. The room's tension thickened. Poirot held their attention with ease. Next, he said, consider the letters Miss Pembroke received, letters that vanished, letters that troubled her deeply. These were not random correspondence. They were warnings. Someone feared exposure. Miss Harrow swallowed. Exposure of what? Poirot inclined his head. Of misconduct, mademoiselle. All eyes shifted to Halbert. Poirot went on. Dr. Halbert, you had access to confidential medical records. You also held the trust of many in this community. Yet you used that trust to conceal a mistake, a misdiagnosis that cost a patient months of proper treatment. Halbert's jaw tightened. It was an error, a single error. And one, Poirot said softly, that you feared would be discovered when Miss Pembroke began reviewing clinic files for her investigation into local health disparities. She was thorough. She noticed irregularities. Miss Pembroke gasped. Alice never told me. She intended to, Poirot said gently. But she wished first to confront the doctor responsible. She was principled, yes, but also compassionate. She hoped the doctor would come forward willingly. Halbert's hands curled into fists. She cornered me. Demanded I report myself. Said she'd give me a week before going to the board. Poirot nodded. And your career, your reputation were at stake. You panicked. I didn't kill her, Halbert said sharply. I didn't touch her. Poirot raised a finger. Ah, Doctor, this is where your misunderstanding begins. Alice Pembroke was not killed by violence. She collapsed because of an undiagnosed heart condition, one no one could have predicted without the very tests she had refused earlier that month. You are guilty of concealment, not murder. The room exhaled in collective shock. Flint blinked. Then why all this? Because guilt, Poirot replied, is a powerful sculptor of behavior. Dr. Halbert feared the truth would emerge, that he had argued with Alice, that she was investigating his records, that she intended to expose him. When she died, he panicked. He hid the pendant she dropped during their confrontation. He destroyed the letters. He erased evidence from the study, and he sent the message to Miss Harrow, hoping to cast suspicion upon others. Miss Harrow stared at him. You sent that? Why? To divert attention, Poirot answered. To create the suggestion of a household feud. To make the mystery larger, more tangled. A frightened man seeks confusion. Halbert pressed a hand to his forehead. I never meant for anything to spiral like this. Alice, she wasn't supposed to... His voice faltered, cracking with something close to despair. Poirot approached him slowly. Doctor, you allowed fear to lead you into deception. You hid the truth because you believed it safer than confession. But your actions, though serious, do not make you a murderer. Alice died from natural causes. Miss Pembroke lowered her face into her hands, shoulders trembling. Poirot rested a gentle hand on her arm. Your sister was brave, he said. She sought justice, but also kindness. Remember her by that." Inspector Flint stepped forward. "Halberd, I'm arresting you for obstruction and for tampering with evidence related to a sudden death. You'll have your chance to explain." Halberd didn't resist. He simply nodded, hollow-eyed, and allowed himself to be taken away. Poirot waited until Flint and Halberd had left the room before addressing the others. "You see," he said softly, "mystery often hides not in violence but in fear. Fear distorts the simplest truth." Ashcombe looked pale. "So all the shadows, all the secrecy, it was because he panicked." "Precisely," Poirot said. "The human heart, monsieur, can be more dangerous than any weapon when ruled by dread." Miss Harrow approached, eyes wide. "And the gazebo?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A man burdened by guilt tries to hide symbols of his cowardice, but even hidden things speak." Miss Pembroke lifted her head. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for giving us clarity." Poirot bowed his head gently. "It is my calling, mademoiselle." Outside, the clouds began to break, letting thin sunlight spill across the grounds. Greywick Hall, once heavy with secrets, seemed to lighten. Poirot stepped to the window and looked out at the gazebo, its peeling paint brightened by the sun. "Ah," he murmured, "order restored." For Hercule Poirot, the little grey cells had once again triumphed. As the final secrets are revealed and justice finds its rightful place, Greywick Hall breathes once more in peaceful order. Poirot takes his leave, assured that no deception can endure forever, not when reason shines its steady light. And for the audience of Unknown Suspect, the case closes with the promise that every mystery, no matter how carefully concealed, awaits the one mind determined to solve it.